Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR 96.3 HD2 and Sirius XM Channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We're at the Reporters Roundtable with more twists and turns in the race for the White House. A just released New York Times survey puts Vice President Kamala Harris with a slight lead over former President Donald Trump. Now, that news comes on the heels of reports saying that Trump secretly sent COVID tests to Russian President Vladimir Putin during the height of the pandemic, plus the politics of responding to natural disasters. And we're going to take a look at the very close Maryland Senate race. Lots to talk about. My guests are Howard University political science professor and director of the International Affairs Program, Dr. Clarence Hussein, and GOP strategist and commentator Malik Abdul. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining the conversation. As I said, lots to get to today. I want to first talk about this new book by award-winning journalist Bob Woodward. The book is titled War, and he writes that Donald Trump secretly sent COVID tests to Vladimir Putin during the 2020 pandemic at a time when there was a shortage of tests here in the United States. I believe he sent some 19 tests, and in the book, I'm paraphrasing here, but Putin said, "Do not tell anyone that you sent these tests to me." And Trump says, I don't care. Let me start with you, Dr. Hussein. Do you think this is important? What are your thoughts about this revelation?
So thank you for having me. So
Absolutely.
There will be many, many, many more revelations. The Trump presidency, as we know, was just rife with corruption and unethical behavior. So Bob Woodward, of course, who's a legendary investigative journalist in Washington, D.C., of course, discovered that, and will find much, much more. So the issue is, will it have any impact on the election? I don't think so. If you've rode with Trump through all of the indictments, through all of the insurrection, through all of that, this is just one more penny in the jar, but it really doesn't really change the dynamics. It does underscore, though, that you cannot trust Trump with national security for the country. He does side deals, backroom deals, anything that he thinks will benefit him personally is basically the Trump agenda. It's always Trump first, not America first.
Malik, your thoughts about this reporting by Bob Woodward?
So let's assume that what we're saying is true. This is apparently based on information that he gleaned from some advisor or someone around Donald Trump. But let's assume that it's true. The president of the United States would have sent about 20 COVID tests to a world leader, and that is supposed to be the injury. I don't care if it was Putin or anyone sending a world leader 20 tests. I don't think that that's an issue, and it certainly doesn't speak to a lot of the work that the Trump administration is doing to make sure that even places like here in Washington, D.C., we had COVID tests. This was going the early days on, and even vaccine as early as January of 2021. But that is what the administration was doing to make sure that places just like here in Washington, D.C. had access to all of these type of things. So this isn't, it's a very weird story. And so I'm assuming that because this is the story that broke out of Bob, for Bob Woodward, veteran journalist, that for this to be the first story means that this probably is the most substantive thing that he has in there about Donald Trump, this allegation that Donald Trump, and he also said that Donald Trump has apparently, according to this aide, has had conversations with Putin since he left office. So I think about 7 times. Even if that is the case, so, I mean, that's not, to me, that's just not an issue. But I do agree with my colleague here that this will not affect the race at all. The feelings that you have for or against Trump are those, and they're not going to change because of this at all.
Do you think, Malik, that the optics are at least bad for Donald Trump, whether it's the COVID tests sent to Putin or talking to Putin since he's left office, particularly in light of the attack against Ukraine? Or do you believe that that this would go to the heart of this is Donald Trump 101, and that this is just no surprise?
Well, I think to your later point, is this no surprise? If you believe that this is something that Donald Trump would do for some sort of nefarious reasons, that's not going to change. Whether he did it, I don't even know what nefarious reasons he would have to do it. But for people who disagree with Donald Trump, it will not just feed into the narrative that they have about Donald Trump being a threat to democracy, as they like to say, but it will also feed into this notion of somehow, Putin is the boogeyman, so therefore we should treat him in that way, even though the United States still in many ways has business ties with Russia to this day. So it's sort of like Putin and then the leader of China, Xi Jinping. You can't have any sort of conversations or anything with those type of leaders because they've become the boogeyman. And for some substantive reasons, but at the end of the day, I just don't think that this is something that speaks to anything, from my perspective, anything negative about Donald Trump. If there were stories that Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton had conversations with the leader of China or the leader of Russia or the leader of Iran after they left office, it just wouldn't be an issue for me. I would expect them to.
Your thoughts about that, Dr. Lucene?
So what I think is what gets raised again is honesty and transparency. So the difference, I think, is that Barack Obama is not running for office. He's not running to be president again. So we have someone who has always had a questionable relationship with Vladimir Putin, who is seen by much of the world as a dishonest player and as one who broke decades of presidents in Europe by invading Ukraine. And so for a former president who's running for president again to have ongoing conversations should raise, at least in the foreign policy circles, high eyebrows in terms of what's the nature of these discussions. Are commitments being made that are not being shared with the American people? So there's a whole a slew of, I think, concerns that come out of that revelation. And then again, with the sending the COVID test to Vladimir Putin, in and of itself is not necessarily an issue, but it does when you put it in the context of all of the controversies that arose around COVID, and again, a ongoing relationship with Russia and with Putin, that has been far, far, far from clear on the part of Donald Trump.
Let me move to a more broader issue of money. There is a report that says that the spending in the presidential and congressional races is projected to hit some 16 billion with a B dollars. That's a whole lot of money. And Malik, I'm sure you remember back in the 2008 Democratic campaign of Barack Obama. He was the first presidential candidate to reach the $1 billion mark in fundraising. But now, compared to 2024, that almost seems like a drop in the bucket. What is your thought about the kind of money that we are seeing in all of these races, not just the presidential race, but in the congressional races and some of the Senate races? The money is just amazing.
If you think of these entire apparatuses around campaigns, around Capitol Hill politicians. There are lobbyists. The lobbyists are there actually to advocate for whatever their policy might be, but they fund a lot of these congressional races. So you have congressional presidential races and even state level races. And you do things that may be in the interest of those lobbying groups. Typically, that is how it happens. I think that it is something that was inevitable with the amount of money that you have in politics, but there are so many tentacles when you talk about what a political campaign is. You have all of these organizations that are not technically tied to either party, but they may be nonprofit organizations who benefit from being attached to the party. So they have some subcontractors that work for them. And this is one of the things now, as you're talking about money, how the campaign spend this money during this cycle, because the Get Out to Vote operation is the thing that will determine this election. It won't be about a rally. It won't be about a debate. It won't even be about a policy at this point. It will be the ground game. Who has the best ground game? Joe Biden was able to best Donald Trump in Georgia, specifically because the Republicans had a poor ground game in the state of Georgia. They're looking to change that this time around with Brian Kemp as, now joining Donald Trump on the campaign trail. But you need money to be able to get those canvassers out, to pay your door knockers, to pay your people who do type of phone banking. But it does not mean that there are not people who are padding their pockets, charging exorbitant rates for things like marketing and digital campaigns. Trust me, these people are getting paid millions to do this type of stuff. And this is what runs campaigns, money.
Yeah, Dr. Lucene, I'd have to agree with Malik here, just in looking back at some of the deep dives that so many journalists have done on, various and sundry campaigns, and realizing, as he just said, even when you're talking about somebody who's running a website here, you're not paying $25,000 or $30,000 to someone. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars to an individual, or millions to a person who may have a small but very proficient and efficient company to run a website, to do the marketing, to do the management. And for a lay person, it is eye-popping and even head-snapping to see just how much money is being spent.
So there are a couple of streams of money in U.S. politics. One is the money that's just raised by the campaigns. They send out fundraisers, people send $5. I'm concerned about the dark money side. We're living the result of one of the most pivotal decisions in the history of the Supreme Court, Citizens United. After that decision, which I believe was in 2010, it essentially said there will be no limits on the amount of money that can be spent in U.S. elections. So there are limits on what you or I or Malik can do in terms of individually given to a candidate, but there are no limits on how much we can spend on behalf of a candidate separate from the campaign. So we could do billboards, we could do digital ads, we could pay people to go out in the streets. We can, and this is a big concern of mine, we can spend money on artificial intelligence, on disinformation, endlessly, basically. And so I think Malik's right in the sense that this is going to be a ground game election and getting people out. But if people are getting messages, well, election day has been shifted, now it's going to be on Wednesday, or there's been an attack and you can't go to your polling site, those are going to be the kind of activities that we've already seen some indications of that are going to flood into the system right now. And so I am really, really concerned that, the cat's out the bag on this one, and the billions of dollars that are floating around, many that will be used for nefarious purposes.
We are going to take a brief break, but don't forget you can hear this at every edition of the Daily Drum Insight segment via podcast on our website, WHUR.com. The original Quiet Storm is next on WHUR. I'm Harold Fisher. This conversation continues on Sirius XM channel 141 and 96.3 HD2 in just a few seconds. Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We continue our discussion at the political roundtable concerning some of the top political stories of the week. My guests are GOP strategist and commentator Malik Abdul and Howard University political science professor and director of the International Affairs Program, Dr. Clarence Lusane. I want to talk a little bit about the interview on 60 Minutes last night with Vice President Kamala Harris, and I want you both to talk about some of the things that that she said. So let's take a look at one of the clips from last night. I'll get you to respond on the other side.
They say that the reason so many voters don't know you is that you have changed your position on so many things. You were against fracking, now you're for it. You supported looser immigration policies, now you're tightening them up. You were for Medicare for all, now you're not. So many that people don't truly know what you believe or what you stand for, and I know you've heard that.
In the last 4 years, I have been Vice President of the United States, and I have been traveling our country, and I have been listening to folks and seeking what is possible in terms of common ground. I believe in building consensus. We are a diverse people, geographically, regionally, in terms of where we are in our backgrounds. And what the American people do want is that we have leaders who can build consensus.
Malik, I know, as a Republican, you would not agree necessarily with just about anything that she says, so I'll give you that. But this is my question to you. Do you believe that the issue about consensus is a valid strategy, not only for a Kamala Harris, but for a Donald Trump? And certainly I will allow you to, share your thoughts about specifically what she said. But first about the consensus, because there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of that right now in any way, shape, or form in this or any race.
So I think that it is something that is good in addition to a strategy, but it can't definitely be the strategy. And the problem with Kamala Harris, if Kamala Harris was able to demonstrate, for instance, if Kamala Harris was able to give an example of, this is what I did as vice president to build consensus around the issue, that's a different story. She wasn't able to do that. And I think the problem for Kamala Harris, it is that Kamala Harris is just uniquely bad at this, in that she doesn't have the political agility of a Barack Obama or even a Hillary Clinton for that matter. If Hillary Clinton were asked certain questions, she would immediately come out with a 5-point plan. She would, even if she didn't answer the question, she had the agility, that ability to deflect. Kamala Harris just naturally, as a politician, does not have that, and it comes across in their interviews. And if you notice, this time around, she didn't say what she said in the first time around on this question of her, flip-flop or hypocrisy. They told Kamala Harris to say that my values haven't changed. Notice, she didn't say that this time around because it didn't go so well the first time. They have her in positions because she's not naturally good at this. And so they kind of prod her with these, a bunch of bullet points and talking points that she tries to get, but she's just not good at this. I don't think it has anything to do with her intelligence or ability to even, be effective at legislating or advocating for policy. She's not good at this. Some politicians are, some aren't. Donald Trump is not good at this because Donald Trump doesn't stay on message. That's where he's just not good at that. Kamala Harris is just simply not good at it.
Dr. Lusane?
So, so a couple of things. So one, I think that in terms of the issue of flip-flopping, look at Donald Trump. Look at Bitcoin. There are a whole range of issues on which Donald Trump has changed his positions. This is what political figures do, sometimes for reasons of consciousness. Barack Obama, for example, changed his position on same-sex marriage. Sometimes it's done for reasons that probably are not as ethical as they should be. All of that to say is Kamala Harris is an evolving politician who was thrust into the role of running for taking over the presidential nomination for the Democratic Party. So we're seeing that evolve. I think on this issue of consensus, this really is the bigger issue for the country, not just for either one of the campaigns. If Congress and the White House cannot move forward, then all of the issues facing the country, issues that people agree upon, cannot really be resolved, whether it's around issues of housing, issues of healthcare, issues of even foreign policy. And so I think her putting that front-facing, that concern, really touches where many people in the country are. I would say even the majority of people who do want the country to move forward and would like to see the political parties, the leaders of the country, actually work in a consensus manner.
So let me talk about something else as it relates to last night's 60 Minutes program. The program started off saying that 60 Minutes has been interviewing the presidential candidates from both parties since 1968. But last night was the first time that a member at the top of a ticket refused to do the interview. They said that they were willing to meet former President Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania, but then they said the dynamics were constantly shifting from his campaign. They were trying to work this out, and the main point was that they were concerned, the campaign was concerned about them fact checking the former president. The 60 Minutes anchor said they fact check everyone. I mean, that is the basis of really 60 Minutes and why it remains, one of the pillars of television journalism in this country. And also they were asking for an apology for something that the campaign said that Leslie Stahl said, which 60 Minutes said that she did not. With all of that said, and I'll start with you, Dr. Lusane, your thoughts about the Trump campaign deciding not to do a 60 Minutes interview.
Well, if I was campaign manager for the Trump campaign, I would not have Trump do it either. Trump has not demonstrated a capacity, as Malik even noted, to stay on message, and the message he goes off on tends to be horrific. There's been just lots and lots of evidence that he is all over the map, very unfocused, and to put him in a situation with very serious journalists who would be, again, fact-checking, as they kind of indicate, would be at high risk. So I think the prudent decision on the campaign was not to do it. I think it's in the face of his performance at the presidential debate, the reason he is refusing to do a second debate. And I think that's where they're going to be with 28 days left.
Malik?
Yeah, so on the issue of the debates, this is something that typically we would have more presidential debates by now, but in part, this is because Kamala Harris didn't agree to the September 4th Fox News debate. And so unfortunately, we're going to have only one presidential debate between the eventual nominees. But I don't think that this issue of Donald Trump not doing the 60. Now, from what I understand, Donald Trump really didn't have any serious intention on doing the 60 Minutes interview. But it is not as if Donald Trump hasn't made himself available for better or for worse, to whether it's along a rope line in a press conference, getting off an airplane, inside of a restaurant. Donald Trump has had no problem making himself available to media. The larger problem has been with Kamala Harris, and during the cycle, which in fact, that was actually probably one of the more challenging interviews, I would say, that Kamala Harris had, because the journalist, so sorry, I forgot his name. He actually,
Bill Whitaker.
Bill Whitaker, yeah, he actually pushed back on Kamala Harris and forced her to address some of the things that she said. This typically, if you have a very good journalist, they're able to do it if you are a Republican or a Democrat. But because Kamala Harris, which is something else that is not normal in political campaigns, hasn't made herself available to media outlets, she's rusty. And so she doesn't, and because she's already not naturally gifted in these type of interviews, she's been able to just say things. And so I thought that Whitaker did a very good job pushing Kamala Harris to address not just, contradictions, but to really spell out some of the things that she's saying. And so in the response to the concerns that people have about her values not changing and that, flip-flopping or maturing, as some people would say, her response was essentially to be a consensus builder.
But Malik, let's say, first of all, nothing is normal in the 2024 political election season. There is nothing normal about this at all. That being said, you cannot compare a sit-down 60 minutes interview with journalists at a rope line or a town hall meeting. That's why 60 minutes is 60 minutes. And so, and it doesn't matter which person it is. And I think that the thing that it's one thing to have a Bill Whitaker push back on and fact check someone who is sitting in front of the subject, the interview subject, but for someone to say, no, we're not going to do the interview for, among other reasons, because you're going to call out facts. I mean, that's, I can't imagine, no, Mom, I'm not going to talk to you about what happened in school today because, if I'm not going to tell the truth, and I don't want to talk to you about it because you're going to tell me that I'm not telling the truth.
Yeah, if I can jump in. So the point I would underscore is, while Trump has given lots of interviews, they've been in very Trump-friendly venues. So interviewing with Sean Hannity or interviewing on Fox is not challenging, and often Trump will say outrageously and grossly false information, and it's not pushed back on. If he did 60 minutes, they would not sit there and let him say that Haitians in Springfield, Ohio are eating cats and dogs. And so I think there was a conscious decision on the part of the campaign that we are just not going to subject our candidate to that kind of rigorous inquiry.
I want to play something else from last night, and then I have a question for both of you.
So what kind of gun do you own, and when and why did you get it?
I have a Glock, and I've had it for quite some time. And look, Bill, my background is in law enforcement. And so there you go.
Have you ever fired it?
Yes. Of course I have. At a shooting range. Yes, of course I have.
Why, Malik, is the fact that Kamala Harris admitting that she is a gun owner, this came out a couple of weeks ago in an interview with Oprah Winfrey, but why do you think that is a significant thing, or do you?
I don't think it is, which is why I'm surprised that Whitaker even asked the question. I don't think that anyone is this is one of their top issues, knowing Kamala Harris' experience with guns. Obviously, for many of us, it was the first time we actually heard her reference being a gun owner. But I don't.
But that's my point. I mean, that this is the first time. I mean, we even
Right.
saw, again, if you go back to Barack Obama shooting a shotgun, that was a big deal because we know, for example, George Bush, the second George Bush. Yes, we knew that he was a gun owner, but he was a Republican. But for a Democrat to admit being a handgun owner, not someone who shoots for sport, not someone who hunts, I think that is significant. But the thing that I'm asking, just to be clear, why do you think that has meaning, particularly where we are in this country, pro or con, regarding gun ownership?
Yeah, so I don't think that it has a lot of meaning. What I think it reflects is this is something, as what you're suggesting, is out of the norm. It's not aligned with what you hear about. So when you think of gun ownership, advocacy of the Second Amendment, you don't necessarily associate that with the Democratic Party or Democrats. I'm from Mississippi, so I grew up around guns. My granddad would ride around with his shotgun in the back of the truck. He would go hunting. He would just have it in the back of the truck. So being around guns, even growing up as a Democrat, as I did, it's the norm for me. In many other places around the country, I have people who recoil at the idea of even being near guns. It's because the Democratic Party is not associated with this in the same way that the Democratic Party is not associated with things regarding like law enforcement. That is something that the Republican Party is associated with. So when you hear something that is, out of the norm, nothing surprising, but something that is out of the norm, then it becomes an issue. So I'm assuming that's why Whitaker is asking the question. I think he knows that this isn't like, an issue for voters, but it is something like, so you're a gun owner, you say, because she's just never talked about it.
Right. Dr. Lusane?
Yeah, so I agree with Malik. I think it was asked because there is an assumption of where the Democratic Party is at on issues of gun and the Second Amendment. The more appropriate question would have been, what's your position on gun control? And getting more of a substantive answer on that, I think, would have been more important to people. I'm sure that, for example, I probably have big differences with her on gun control from what I've understand her to have said. That would notwithstanding, I think that's the issue. But gun control, again, for Democrats, of course, is not a top issue. It's not a number one issue because there's an assumption of law and order would be enhanced if there were less guns on the street, if there was more, as the Democrats would see it, sensible gun control. And so I think, those are really the issues that probably should have been discussed as opposed to what kind of seemed a little sensationalist.
Let's talk a little bit about the New York Times Siena poll that finds, this, of course, just out, that it finds 49% in favor of Harris, 46% in favor of Trump. Dr. Lusane, your thoughts about that latest poll?
Yeah, so the polls are going to go up and down, up and down, up and down. So we trace them. It's important, I think, maybe they look at the trends in the polls, but the snapshots are going to be all over the map. This is a close race. It absolutely is going to be determined by turnout. Who is going to get their people out? There's not a lot of persuadables right now. That's one of the things we've seen in the polls. We have a polling group at Howard University, for example, that I'm part of, and there's almost no persuadables that are available. So it's really kind of turn your people out. It's going to be a close race, and again, with 28 days, all kind of crazy things could happen. But I think probably at this point, the die is cast, and it's get your people on the ground, get those GOTV, get out the vote operations going, and don't leave any money on the table. Spend it all to get your people out.
Well, what about that, Malik? I mean, you've got, as Dr. Hussein just said, the die may be cast for those who were diehard Trump supporters, diehard Harris supporters, but then you've got this smidgen, that's a technical term, the smidgen of these so-called undecideds who may, we would hope that these people would vote on November 5th or however they vote, mail in, early voting, what have you. But just from your thought process, Malik, what's going on with the undecideds? What are they waiting for?
So these are people who, I'll say, as far as how I describe the undecideds, people who, are for whatever reason reluctant to give their honest take on exactly where they are. Now, if you think nationally, and I want your audience to understand this here, the undecideds that we're talking about are isolated to Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and North Carolina. So for some reason, it is just the battleground states seem to have the only people in the country who are undecided. I think undecided, again, is just another term for people who live in those battleground states. What has to happen in those battleground states, and those numbers are a little different from the national polls, because depending on the state, Donald Trump, depending on the poll, Donald Trump may have a lead, 1 point or so lead in a couple of those states. That's where it's going to matter. And the get out to vote operation in those states, that's what's going to matter. Now, some places like, for instance, North Carolina will obviously be impacted by the hurricane, but that is something that I have every confidence in, that local leaders will be working to make people, sure that people are able to vote. But as the doctor said here, it is the get out to vote operation. But those undecideds are in those 7 battleground states.
Let's talk a little bit about the hurricane. We know that Hurricane Milton is expected to make landfall in western Florida, around the Tampa area tomorrow. It was a Category 5 yesterday, slowing down to a Category 3, still deadly dangerous. Let's talk about that after this.
And she sends their money to foreign nations. He and she, they send hundreds of billions of dollars. They send hundreds of billions of dollars to foreign nations. And you know what they're giving our people? $750. 700. Here, Tyson. This is the worst response, I think. Troy, what do you think? The worst? Never saw one like this.
So, time for the fact check, where we've had these barbs going back and forth between the campaigns and the administration and the campaign of the Biden administration and the Trump campaign about misinformation, the disinformation, and the $750 is an initial amount for food and necessities. It is not. It doesn't stop there. Dr. Hussein, what impact do you believe that the comment that Donald Trump made has on this kind of relief effort?
Well, it's on brand. It's creating chaos, and what they're seeing in Florida, what they're seeing in North Carolina, are people who are very desperate and absolutely need assistance, but are being confused because they're not sure, one, that the assistance is they're getting what they should get. My sister actually has a place in Florida that's right in that storm's way up in Bridgeton. She's not down there, but she's getting updates like every 10 minutes. And so that's kind of a counter to some of the disinformation, but it's an extremely difficult circumstance And we haven't talked about how it might impact the election, because I think North Carolina might be a swing state, but there are swing elections going on in Florida, so that could be an issue as we move forward.
Malik?
Yeah, so what you heard from Donald Trump was politicizing a natural disaster. It would be great to say if this is something that doesn't happen in politics, but of course it does. Democrats do it all the time. We remember what happened during 2005 with Hurricane Katrina, where George Bush was being criticized for not going into New Orleans, not realizing what it takes for a president of the United States and the type of infrastructure is required to even get a presidential visit. But that is something that Democrats successfully use and waged against George W. Bush. And so that was folded into the federal government's response, where people blame George Bush for the response to that. Now the same thing is happening. The $750, it is an initial payment. And what Donald Trump is actually conflating is another program that, of course, the DHS Secretary Mayorkas acknowledged that did give about, I think, $2 billion, where FEMA is in concert with, I think, the Custom and Border Patrol Agency to direct money for migrants. It is a separate pool of money, to be sure, but that is what Donald Trump is conflating, but it's feeding into the narrative that many people have about the billions, not just that we send to Lebanon or to, Israel, well, millions that we send to Lebanon, but the billions that we send to Israel, the billions that we send to Ukraine, and not being able to take care of the American people. That's what he's tapping into when he's talking about this.
Well, and to your point about the politics of natural disasters, I'm sure we all remember back in 2012 with Hurricane Sandy, and that then President Barack Obama, a Democrat, reached out to Chris Christie, the governor of New Jersey, a Republican. Chris Christie got a lot of pushback for that, and the Obama administration at the time, you could argue that this wasn't about politics. This was about people who were suffering, people who were hurting. And could that have helped bolster Obama's image as a person who cares about people over party? Yes. But right now there was reporting that Governor Ron DeSantis isn't taking Vice President Kamala Harris's phone calls in addressing aid to Florida. Politico was reporting that. DeSantis is saying that he didn't know that she was trying to call. That's got to be the biggest bunch of, I mean, come on. If the vice president or president is trying to reach you to address issues regarding your state, come on, man. Dr. Lucene?
Yeah, so he may not be taking her call, but he's taking the resources coming from the federal government. And there are state officials who have spoken out about how rapidly there's been a response and how effective there's been a response from the federal government. The same thing in North Carolina, that the Democratic governor, but also some of the Republican legislators in the state have also said similar kinds of remarks of not only appreciating what's come from the federal government, but also decrying the spread of false information, which isn't just Donald Trump. It's just rampant on social media. So there's a giant plea to try to push back on some of that, because it does have the ultimate impact of causing people a significant amount of harm.
Mm-hmm. Let me quickly, before I've got about a minute, and I definitely have to touch on this, Malik, this very, very tight race between Prince George's County Executive Angela Alsobrooks and former Maryland Governor Larry Hogan for the open U.S. Senate seat. Angela Alsobrooks taking an optics hit over the property tax issue. Do you think it's going to hurt her, or with the polls saying that she is beating Hogan. What's your take on it? Really quick, please.
Just quickly, Ron DeSantis has had conversations with Joe Biden, just not Vice President Harris. I think
Right.
that Angela Also Brooks actually is going to win this. The problem for Larry Hogan is that Larry Hogan had to be able to galvanize those MAGA voters that he maligned so much when he was governor. He can't mobilize them in order to drum support for him. So I think that Angela Also Brooks actually is going to win this.
There you go. Win or lose for Also Brooks, Dr. Hussein, 5 seconds.
Yeah, I think so too. I think the argument that even if people like Hogan, the fact that that would surrender the Senate to Republicans is just not a bridge that Democrats are going to cross. Who again may like Hogan, but see a danger.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time and your insight. I really appreciate it. We are out of time. That is the Daily Drum for this Tuesday, October 8th. I'm Harold Fisher. Good night.